When a 16-year-old girl found a dying stranger on a street corner the morning of her final exam, the test that would determine her entire future, she had seconds to decide: save herself or save someone she'd never met. What she chose changed 3 lives forever. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Ruby Rhodes stood frozen on Hartwell Street at exactly 7:22 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that would fracture her life into before and after. Her backpack hung heavy on her shoulders, stuffed with 2 pencils, a calculator, and the student ID that was supposed to get her into the most important exam of her 16 years. But none of that mattered now, because slumped against a brick wall of Patterson Corner Store, barely visible in the early morning shadows, was a woman who couldn't breathe. Ruby's phone screen glowed in her trembling hand. 38 minutes until her final comprehensive exam started. 38 minutes to get across Cedar Grove, Illinois, board the bus, and make it to Lincoln Heights Academy before the doors closed. No exceptions, no makeups. Miss this test, repeat the entire junior year, watch all her friends graduate without her. The woman's head lifted slightly, and even in the dim light, Ruby could see the swelling, the pale, clammy skin, the way her chest heaved with shallow, desperate gasps. "Help!" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Please." Ruby's father's voice echoed in her head, the same warning he'd given her since she was old enough to walk to school alone. Keep your head down, stay safe, don't get involved in things that aren't your business.
Every logical thought screamed at her to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't seen anything, to protect the future she'd worked so hard to build. But the woman's eyes found hers, pleading, terrified. Ruby's feet moved before her brain could stop them. She dropped to her knees beside the woman. Up close, she could see this wasn't just any woman. The expensive suit, designer handbag, diamond earrings catching the streetlight. This was someone important, someone who should have people to help her. But right now, she had no one except a 16-year-old girl who was supposed to be on a bus. What happened? What's wrong? Ruby's voice cracked with panic. The woman's lips moved, barely forming words. Her hand shot out with surprising strength and gripped Ruby's wrist. Banana! Ruby's mind raced through every health class, every biology lesson she'd absorbed in her relentless pursuit of good grades. The swelling throat, the hives crawling up the woman's neck, the wheezing breaths. Allergic reaction! You ate banana and you're having an allergic reaction? The woman managed the smallest nod, and then her eyes began to flutter closed. No! Stay with me! Please stay with me! Ruby looked around frantically. The street was completely empty. Patterson's wouldn't open for another hour. The autumn leaves rustled in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked, but no help was coming. 7:26 a.m. Ruby's hands shook so badly she could barely unlock her phone. She dialed 911, her breath coming in short gasps that matched the woman's labored breathing.
911, what's your emergency? There's a woman, Hartwell Street, corner of 5th. She can't breathe, allergic reaction. Her throat is closing. Please send help now. Ma'am, help us on the way. Stay calm. Can you tell me? I can't stay, Ruby interrupted, her voice rising. Henderson Pharmacy, 2 blocks, EpiPen. She's going to die if I don't. She dropped the phone and ran. Her lungs burned. Her backpack slammed against her spine with every stride. She'd never been athletic. All her time went to studying, to trying to be perfect, to making her dad proud. But now she ran like her life depended on it. Because someone's life did depend on it. Ruby crashed through the door of Henderson Pharmacy's 24-hour emergency window, startling the night shift pharmacist so badly he knocked over his coffee. EpiPen, she gasped. Woman, dying, allergic reaction, banana, throat closing, please. The pharmacist, his name tag read Ron, took one look at the pure terror in this teenager's eyes and grabbed his keys. Anaphylaxis? Yes, she can't breathe. I don't know how long. Please, I have to go back. Ron's hands moved with practiced efficiency, pulling an epinephrine auto-injector from the locked cabinet. Do you know how to administer this? Health class, we practiced. Yes, I know. Outer thigh. Hold for 10 seconds. I know! Ruby was already moving toward the door. Thank you, thank you. Go. I'm calling it in. The run back felt longer. Every second stretched into an eternity. Ruby's mind kept conjuring the worst, arriving to find the woman already gone, the street corner empty except for a designer handbag and the ghost of a choice that came too late.
But when she rounded the corner onto Hartwell Street, the woman was still there. Barely. Her breathing had deteriorated to a thin whistle. Her lips were taking on a blue tinge. One hand clutched at her throat in a futile attempt to pull in air that wouldn't come. Ruby dropped beside her, fingers fumbling with the EpiPen cap. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Health class had been one thing, a practice dummy, a classroom full of giggling students. No real stakes. This was different. This was life and death, and Ruby was the only one standing between them. She positioned the auto-injector against her outer thigh, right through the expensive suit pants. Please work. Please, please work. She pressed down hard. The click seemed impossibly loud in the quiet morning. Ruby held it there, counting in her head. 1, 2, 3. The woman's face was gray. 4, 5, 6. Was it supposed to take this long? 7, 8, 9. What if she'd done it wrong? 10. She pulled the injector away. For one terrible, endless moment, nothing happened. Then the woman gasped, a deep, ragged, beautiful inhale, and her eyes flew open. Ruby sat back on her heels, suddenly aware that tears were streaming down her face, that her whole body was shaking, that sirens were wailing in the distance. The woman's hand found hers and squeezed weakly. Ruby looked down at her phone screen. 8:17 a.m. 17 minutes after her exam had started. 17 minutes into a test she'd spent months preparing for. 17 minutes past the point of no return. The paramedics arrived, like a cavalry in blue uniforms. They moved with efficient calm. Asking Ruby questions, she answered automatically, while her brain tried to process what she'd just done, what she'd just lost. As they loaded the woman onto a stretcher, now stabilized and breathing normally, one of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, squeezed Ruby's shoulder. You saved her life, sweetheart. That was textbook anaphylaxis response. How old are you? 16. 16! The paramedic shook her head in amazement. Most adults would have kept walking. You're something special, you know that. Ruby didn't feel special. She felt like she'd just thrown away her entire future for a stranger. The woman on the stretcher, now with an oxygen mask covering half her face, reached out and grabbed Ruby's hand one more time. Her eyes were clearer now, focused and intense. Thank you, she whispered behind the mask. You saved my life. What's your name? Ruby Rhodes. Ruby. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Ruby Rhodes. I'm never going to forget that name. She started walking home, each step heavier than the last. The maple trees lining Hartwell Street had leaves just beginning to turn autumn colors. Ruby had always loved this time of year, the promise of change, of seasons shifting, of new beginnings. Now it just felt like endings. The walk home gave her too much time to think, too much time to replay every moment of the last hour, too much time to calculate exactly what she'd sacrificed. She thought about the polynomial equations she'd memorized, the essay structures she'd practiced, the 3 all-nighters she'd pulled in the past week alone, reviewing every possible topic that might appear on that exam. She thought about her father, Wesley, who worked 60 hours weeks at the warehouse so she could have a chance at college, who came home exhausted every night but still helped her study at their tiny kitchen table, who believed she was going to be the one to break them out of the cycle of barely making ends meet. What was she going to tell him? Dad? I threw away everything we've worked for. I missed the exam. I'm going to repeat junior year. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
The small apartment complex where they lived came into view. It wasn't much. Chipped paint, a parking lot full of old cars, windows covered with mismatched curtains. But it was home. And right now, Ruby wanted nothing more than to crawl into her bed and pretend this morning had never happened. But when she opened the door to their second-floor apartment, Wesley was already there. He sat at the kitchen table in his warehouse uniform, navy blue shirt with his name embroidered over the pocket, and the expression on his face broke something in Ruby's chest. The school had called him. Of course they had. "Dad," she started, but her voice crumbled. "The school said you didn't show up for your exam. They said you never walked through the doors. Ruby, I left work. I've been calling you for 20 minutes. Where were you? What happened?" And that's when Ruby completely fell apart. She collapsed into a chair, and the whole story came tumbling out between sobs. The woman on the street, the choice, the run to the pharmacy, the EpiPen, the paramedics, the exam time ticking away while she held a stranger's hand. Wesley listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding, to something Ruby couldn't quite read. When she finally finished, they sat in silence. The clock ticked loudly. Outside, someone's car alarm chirped off. "I messed up," she whispered. "Dad, I messed up so bad. I'm going to have to repeat the whole year. All my friends are going to graduate without me. All that studying, all that work, it was for nothing. I threw it away. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Ruby, look at me." She lifted her head. Her father's eyes were red, but his voice was steady. "You didn't mess up. Do you hear me? You didn't mess up. But the exam. Forget the exam." Wesley reached across the table and took both her hands in his. His palms were rough from years of manual labor, calloused from loading trucks and moving boxes, but his grip was gentle. "A woman is alive right now because of you. Do you understand what that means? Someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's friend. She gets to go home tonight because my little girl was brave enough to stop."
"But you work so hard so I can have a future, and I just—" "Ruby," Wesley's voice cracked. "Your mother and I, we didn't raise you to be successful. We raised you to be good. And today, you were good. Today, you were the person we always hoped you'd be." It was the first time he'd mentioned her mother in months. They didn't talk about Sarah Rhodes often. The grief was still too raw, even 5 years after she died in her sleep from an undiagnosed heart condition. 5 years since their world had split in half, leaving Wesley to raise their daughter alone on a warehouse worker's salary. Ruby had been 11 when she found her mother that morning, too young to understand the full weight of loss, but old enough to watch her father transform from a man who laughed easily to a man who carried worry like a second skin. "Mom would be disappointed in me," Ruby said quietly. "She always said education was the only way out." "Your mother would be proud of you," Wesley corrected firmly. "She worked 3 jobs to save for your college fund. She studied for her GED at night after you went to bed. She knew what education meant. But you know what she told me once? She said, 'Wes, I don't care if Ruby becomes a doctor or a teacher or works at the grocery store. I just want her to be kind, because kindness is the only thing that really changes the world.'" Ruby's tears came harder. "I don't know what to do now." "We'll figure it out," Wesley squeezed her hands. "Maybe there's a makeup exam. Maybe we can talk to the principal. Maybe you do repeat a year, and if you do, you'll still get where you're going. Your education isn't going anywhere, sweetheart. But that woman on the street, without you, she wouldn't have had tomorrow." They sat together at that small kitchen table for a long time. Father and daughter, both of them scared about the future, but certain about one thing. Ruby had made the right choice, even if it cost her everything. Ruby eventually went to her room and lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. The afternoon light filtered through her window,
painting patterns on the walls covered with her achievement certificates and honor roll ribbons. Proof that how hard she'd worked might not mean anything anymore.
Her phone buzzed with text from friends. Claire, everyone's asking where you were. Are you okay? Marcus, Ruby, what happened? You've been preparing for this test forever. Jenny, the exam was brutal. Call me when you can. Ruby turned her phone face down. She couldn't deal with that yet. Couldn't face the questions, the concern, the pity that would come when they learned what she'd done. Had anyone ever sacrificed their entire future for a stranger before? Had anyone been this stupid? But then she remembered the woman's eyes, the way they'd pleaded, the sound of her gasping for air, the terrifying blue tinge to her lips. And Ruby knew, even through the grief of losing this year, that she'd make the same choice again. She just hoped she wouldn't have to pay quite so much for it. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of Ruby trying to negotiate with the school administration. 2 weeks of hitting brick walls. The district had a firm policy: no makeups on final comprehensive exams except for documented emergencies, meaning the student's own medical emergencies, not someone else's. I understand what you did was noble, the vice principal had told her. Sympathy genuine, but hands tied. But the policy exists for fairness. If we make an exception for you, we'd have to make exceptions for everyone. But I saved someone's life, Ruby had pleaded. And that's admirable, truly, but it doesn't change district policy. So Ruby faced the reality. She'd be repeating junior year, starting over in the fall while Claire and Marcus and Jenny moved on to senior year without her, watching them graduate while she sat through another year of classes she'd already mastered. Wesley tried to stay positive. He'd say, maybe it's a blessing in disguise. You'll ace everything the second time around. Your GPA will be perfect.
But they both knew the truth. Ruby had lost time she couldn't get back. And in a household where every dollar was stretched thin, where Wesley's warehouse salary barely covered rent and groceries, the thought of delaying college by a year and the financial aid that came with it felt like a weight crushing them both. Ruby stopped sleeping well. She'd lie awake at night, playing those few minutes on Hartwell Street over and over in her mind, searching for a different choice she could have made, some way to save the woman and make it to her exam, some magical solution that didn't exist. By the third Saturday after the incident, Ruby had almost accepted her new reality, almost made peace with the price of kindness. And then she heard the helicopter. It started as a distant hum, like a bee or a lawnmower, easily dismissed. But the sound grew louder, closer, until the windows in their apartment were rattling, and Wesley was jumping up from the couch where he'd been reading the newspaper. "What the hell?" he muttered, moving to the window. Ruby joined him, and they both watched in disbelief as a sleek black helicopter descended into the small community park directly across from their apartment complex. Within seconds, every resident of their building was rushing outside. Mrs. Lilly from upstairs, the Rodriguez family from the first floor, old Mr. Kevin, who usually never left his recliner, even the teenagers who typically lounged in the parking lot smoking cigarettes they thought no one noticed. Everyone gathered on the sidewalk, staring as the helicopter touched down on the grass, its rotors kicking up leaves and debris in a dramatic swirl. Wesley put a protective arm around Ruby. "Stay close to me." The helicopter door opened, and Ruby's heart stopped, because stepping out, looking healthy and polished and completely transformed from the dying woman on a street corner, was her, the woman Ruby had saved. She wore an elegant cream-colored pantsuit, her dark hair styled perfectly, sunglasses perched on her head. She looked like someone who belonged on magazine covers, not in their struggling neighborhood where helicopters never, ever landed. The woman's eyes scanned the crowd of gawking residents, and when they landed on Ruby, her face broke into a smile that could have powered the whole building. She walked directly toward them, and the crowd parted instinctively, everyone too stunned to do anything but watch. "Ruby Rhodes?" the woman asked, though her expression said she already knew the answer. Ruby couldn't speak, could barely nod. "My name is Mila Hartley." She glanced at Wesley, taking in his protective stance, the resemblance in their features. "I must be her father. I can see where she gets her courage." Wesley's arm tightened around Ruby. "I'm Wesley Rhodes. What's this about?"
Mila turned back to Ruby, and her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. 3 weeks ago, this young woman saved my life, and then I had to find her. The crowd pressed closer, whispers rippling through the residence. Ruby felt like she was floating outside her body, watching this scene happen to someone else. After I was released from a hospital, Mila continued, her voice carrying easily in the stunned silence. I needed to understand what happened. Who had stopped when everyone else kept walking? The pharmacy had security footage. I got your name from the 911 call records, and I learned something that broke my heart. She paused, and Ruby could feel every eye on them. You missed your final exam. You sacrificed your entire academic year to save a stranger's life. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Ruby heard Mrs. Lilly gasp, heard someone say, "That's why she didn't go to school that day." Wesley's voice was barely a whisper. "You did this for her?"
I couldn't just leave her, Dad, Ruby said. The same words she'd told him that awful afternoon. No, you couldn't, Mila agreed, hearing the exchange. Because that's who you are, and that's exactly why I'm here. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, but she didn't open it yet. I'm the CEO of Hartley Industries. We manufacture medical equipment and emergency response technology, including the very EpiPen that saved my life that morning. She smiled slightly. The irony isn't lost on me. I built a company around saving lives, and then a 16-year-old girl saved mine with our own product. Ruby's head was spinning. This was too much, too surreal. I need to tell you 3 things, Ruby Rhodes. Mila held up one finger. First, I spoke with the superintendent of Lincoln Heights Academy and the State Education Board. Your case is unique, genuine heroism resulting in a missed exam. They've agreed to let you take the test next Friday. Special administration, you get your chance. Ruby's knees went weak. Wesley's arm was the only thing keeping her upright. That's not possible, she stammered. They said there were no exceptions. There weren't, until I made a few calls. Until I told them that a student who sacrifices her future to save a stranger's life deserves every exception we can make. Oh my, Ruby breathed. Dad, I can take the exam. Wait, Mila said gently. There's more. She held up a second finger. Second, I'm establishing a scholarship fund in your name. The Ruby Rhodes Emergency Response Scholarship. Full ride to any university you choose. All 4 years. Room, board, tuition, books, everything. Wesley made a sound like he'd been punched in the gut. Before you say no, Mila continued quickly, this isn't charity. This is an investment. Someone who makes the choice you made, who values another person's life over their own success, is exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. I want to ensure nothing stands in the way of you becoming whoever you're meant to be.
Ruby was crying now, full-body sobs that shook her shoulders. Around them, the crowd of neighbors had gone completely silent, many of them tearing up as well. And third, Mila said, her own voice thick with emotion, I'd like to get to know you both, if you'll let me. You gave me my life back, Ruby. The least I can do is be part of yours, if you want that. Wesley pulled Ruby close, and she felt his tears in her hair. Her father, who never cried, was crying. Her father, who worked himself to exhaustion trying to give her a future, was crying because a stranger in a helicopter had just given them both something he couldn't have bought with a lifetime of warehouse shifts. Why? Ruby finally managed to ask. Why would you do all this? Mila stepped closer and gently cupped Ruby's face. Because that morning, I was lying on that street corner for 15 minutes before you came along. 15 minutes of watching people walk past. Some of them looked right at me and kept going. They all had somewhere to be, something more important to do, and I was going to die there. alone on a street corner, because no one cared enough to stop. Her voice broke. And then you stopped. You didn't know who I was. You had every reason to keep walking, more reason than anyone else because you had the most to lose. But you stopped anyway. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Ruby shook her head, speechless. I've lived for 35 years. I've built a company worth millions. I've met presidents and celebrities and people who were supposed to be special. And in all that time, I've never met anyone as truly extraordinary as you, Ruby Rhodes. 16 years old, and you already understand what most people never learn, that kindness matters more than success, that someone else's life matters more than our convenience. She stepped back and addressed the crowd, her voice stronger now. This is what a hero looks like. Not someone in a cape or a uniform, just a teenage girl who chose compassion when it cost her everything.
The crowd erupted in applause, spontaneous, thunderous applause that echoed off the apartment buildings. Mrs. Lilly was crying. Mr. Patterson was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. The Rodriguez kids were cheering. And Ruby stood there, held by her father, unable to believe that the worst moment of her life had somehow transformed into the best. That evening, after the helicopter had departed and the neighborhood had returned to its normal, quiet chaos, Ruby sat with Wesley at their small kitchen table. The same table where he'd comforted her 3 weeks ago. The same table where he'd told her she'd made the right choice, even when it seemed like the wrong one. "I can't believe this is real," Ruby whispered, staring at the folder Mila had left behind, full of scholarship paperwork, contact information, and a personal check for $5,000 to help with any immediate needs. Wesley was still processing it all, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up." "Dad," Ruby reached across and took his hand. "You can stop working so hard now. The scholarship covers everything. You can finally rest." Wesley's eyes filled with tears again. "I thought I'd failed you. When you missed that exam, I thought I'd failed as a father, that maybe if we'd had more money, if I'd been able to give you more, you wouldn't have been in that situation. Dad, no! But I was wrong. We might not have much money, but I raised you right. Your mother and I, we raised you to be exactly the person you are, and that's worth more than any trust fund could ever be." They sat in comfortable silence, both of them thinking about Sarah Rhodes, about how she would have reacted to today, about how proud she would have been. "Mom used to say that kindness is the only currency that really matters. I never really understood what she meant until today."
She'd be so proud of you, baby girl. She'd be proud of you, too. You taught me to be brave. You showed me how to keep going when things are hard. That woman, Mila, she thanked me. But really, I was just doing what you've been doing my whole life. Helping someone even when it costs you everything. Wesley squeezed her hand, unable to speak. Ruby took the exam the following Friday and passed with the highest score in her class. But that wasn't the most important thing that happened over the next year. The most important thing was the Saturday mornings. Mila started coming by every Saturday, arriving in a sensible sedan instead of a helicopter, bringing fresh pastries from a downtown bakery called Francesca's that Ruby and Wesley had never been able to afford. She'd sit at their kitchen table, the same table that had witnessed so many moments of their journey, and help Ruby with college application essays. But more than that, she'd ask about their lives. Really ask. She wanted to know about Wesley's work, about the years he'd spent as a single father, about Sarah and the kind of woman she'd been. She wanted to know about Ruby's dreams, her fears, her favorite books, and her worst subjects in school. And slowly, over months of shared meals and long conversations and Saturday mornings filled with laughter, something unexpected happened. Mila saw in Wesley a kind of strength she'd never encountered in her corporate world. The strength of a man who'd given up his own dreams to raise his daughter alone, who'd worked himself to exhaustion without complaint, who measured success in his child's happiness rather than his bank account. And Wesley saw in Mila a woman who, despite her wealth and success, understood what really mattered, who remembered what it felt like to struggle, who'd built her company from nothing, who cried when she talked about the morning a teenage girl saved her life. They fell in love the way autumn leaves fall, gradually, then all at once, inevitable as the seasons changing.
Ruby noticed it first, the way her father smiled when Mila's car pulled up, the way Mila's eyes softened when Wesley told stories about raising Ruby, the way their conversations lingered long after the pastries were gone and the college essays were finished. "I think they like each other," she told Claire one day at school. "Obviously," Claire said, "your dad deserves to be happy, Ruby. After everything he's been through, everything he's done for you, he deserves this." Ruby knew she was right, but it was still strange watching her father fall in love with the woman Ruby had saved, like the universe had tied their lives together in some cosmic knot that couldn't be undone. Not that Ruby wanted it undone. Mila had become family in a way that had nothing to do with helicopters or scholarships. She'd become the person who understood what they'd been through because she'd been part of it. She'd become the person who made Wesley laugh again, really laugh, the way he used to before Mom died. By the time Ruby got her acceptance letter to Northwestern University, with the Ruby Rhodes Emergency Response Scholarship covering every penny, she had two parents cheering for her. The father who had always been there, who'd sacrificed everything, who taught her that kindness mattered more than success, and the woman whose life she'd saved, who'd given them both a future they couldn't have imagined. The night before Ruby left for college, the three of them sat in the apartment that suddenly felt too small and too big at the same time. Mila had brought champagne for her and Wesley, sparkling cider for Ruby. They toasted to new beginnings, to second chances, to the strange and beautiful way life could transform in an instant. "I had been thinking about that morning," Mila said, swirling her champagne thoughtfully, "about all the things that had to go exactly wrong for our paths to cross." "The banana smoothie," Wesley said with a slight smile. He'd heard this story dozens of times now, but he never tired of it.
"The banana smoothie," Mila agreed. "I had stopped at this new cafe on my way to a board meeting. Never thought to ask about ingredients. Should have known better. I had avoided bananas my whole life after a mild reaction as a kid. Thought I'd outgrown it." "But you hadn't," Ruby said softly. "No. And 10 minutes after I drank that smoothie, I couldn't breathe. I tried to get help. I really tried. But everyone just kept walking." Mila's voice caught. "I watched at least 20 people pass by before you showed up. Some of them looked right at me. One man actually stepped around me like I was an obstacle on the sidewalk." "That's horrible," Ruby whispered. "That's reality," Mila said. "We live in a world where people are so focused on their own lives, their own problems, their own schedules, that they forget to see each other. And I was going to die because of it." She reached over and took Ruby's hand. "But then you didn't keep walking. You had more to lose than anyone else who passed me that morning. You had a test that would determine your entire future. You had every excuse to keep going, but you stopped anyway." "I couldn't not stop. I know Dad always told me to keep my head down, to not get involved, and I tried to listen to that voice. But there was this other voice that was louder, and it kept saying, 'What if that was your mom? What if someone had walked past her when she needed help?' And I just couldn't." Wesley's eyes filled with tears for what felt like the 100th time that year. "Your mother would be so proud of you, of the woman you're becoming. She'd be proud of all of us," Mila added. "Of Wesley for raising a daughter who understands what really matters. Of Ruby for having the courage to act on it. And maybe, if she's watching, she'd be happy that her family found someone else to love who loves them just as much." It was the first time Mila had acknowledged what was growing between her and Wesley, and the words hung in the air like a promise. Wesley reached over and took her hand. "Sarah would like you. She'd appreciate that you see Ruby for who she really is, not just for what she can achieve." "I do see her," Mila said softly. "I see a young woman who's going to change the world, not because of grades or scholarships or any of the things we measure success by, but because she already understands what took me 35 years to learn, that we're all connected, that saving one person saves us all."
Ruby cried most of the way to Northwestern the next day. Wesley drove her in the used car Mila had helped him buy, reliable and safe, perfect for a single dad who didn't need flash but did need to know his daughter could call him if she broke down. Mila followed in her own car, unwilling to miss this moment. They moved Ruby into her dorm room, a space that felt impossibly large after the small bedroom she'd grown up in. Other students were arriving with their families, unloading SUVs full of expensive furniture and decorations. Ruby had 2 suitcases and a box of books, but she had something those other students didn't. 2 people who loved her unconditionally, and a story that had already changed her life. When it was time to say goodbye, Wesley held his daughter for a long time. "Call me whenever you need anything," he whispered. "I'm so proud of you, Ruby. So incredibly proud. I love you, Dad. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being you." Mila hugged her next, and Ruby realized she was hugging back just as tightly. This woman who'd been a stranger dying on a street corner had become family. "Study hard, but not too hard," Mila said with a smile. "And remember, grades are important, but they're not everything. The person you are matters more than anything you'll achieve." "I know," Ruby said. "You taught me that. Both of you." As Wesley and Mila drove away, Wesley's hand finding Mila's across the center console, Ruby stood in front of her new dorm and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The choice she'd made on a Tuesday morning in October, the price she thought she'd have to pay, the unexpected gift that had come from choosing kindness over self-preservation. If someone had told her a year ago that missing her exam would lead to this, to a full scholarship, to a new family, to her father finding love again, she never would have believed it. But life was strange that way. Sometimes, the things that looked like endings were actually beginnings. Sometimes the worst moments transformed into the best. Sometimes, saving someone else's life meant saving your own.
Because Mila had been right that day in the park when she'd told the crowd what a hero looked like. Not someone in a cape or a uniform, just a teenage girl who'd stopped when everyone else kept walking. Ruby Rhodes had saved a life that October morning. But in doing so, she'd saved her own life too. She'd learned that the things we sacrifice for others have a way of coming back to us multiplied, that kindness is never wasted, that the universe has a strange way of rewarding those brave enough to choose compassion over convenience. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, a helicopter lands in your neighborhood and everything changes. Because in the end, the test Ruby passed that morning wasn't the one in the classroom. It was the one on a street corner, where she had seconds to decide what kind of person she wanted to be. She chose kindness, and kindness chose her right back. Have you ever made a choice that changed everything? Maybe it wasn't as dramatic as Ruby's story, but we all have those moments where we decide between our own convenience and someone else's need. Drop a comment and tell me about yours. I'd love to hear your story. And if this touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Stories like Ruby's remind us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they're just 16-year-old girls running to pharmacies in the early morning. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.